Hello and welcome to today's lecture in the Women and Gender Performance in the Phoenician Homeland and Diaspora series, which is co-sponsored by the Bade Museum of Archaeology, Archaeological Research Facility at UC Berkeley, and East Carolina University. My name is Brooke Norton. I'm the Associate Curator at the Bade Museum, and before we get started today, I would like to begin by reading a brief statement on behalf of the Bade Museum. We would like to begin by acknowledging that Berkeley, California is on the territory of the Huchiyun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenye Ohlone. We respect the land and the people who have stewarded it throughout many generations, and we honor their elders and their ancestors. We are living in a moment that warrants deep reflection on our past and present. As a museum dedicated to advancing knowledge of the archaeology and history of the ancient Levant, the Bade Museum welcomes scholarly discussions across boundaries of nationality, religion, and gender identity. In many global contexts, equal access to healthcare, education, fair wages, and human rights is contested on the basis of sex, gender, and other identity categories. In an effort to bring light to these timely issues, to serve a broader public audience online, and to become more an inclusive, welcoming, and equitable institution that practices the philosophy of radical inclusion adopted by its parent institution, Pacific School of Religion, one of those steps is the continued creation of public programming. Through this lecture series, we hope to highlight new and established scholars who are engaging with risky and marginalized topics concerning women, gender performance, and sexuality in the past. We invite you to participate in these programs so that together we can listen, learn, and work towards creating a more inclusive museum community. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to now invite my colleague, Dr. Helen Dixon, to the floor to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you so much, Brooke. It's such a pleasure to be here again, speaking about such an important topic this moment. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Maroun Khreich, Associate Professor of Ancient Near Eastern Studies and member of several archaeological missions. Recently, Maroun has been nominated as Executive Director of the newly founded Chair for Phoenician Studies at the Université Saint-Joseph, Beirut, and he's implementing the Phoenician Heritage Institute on behalf of the Quorum Foundation in Beirut. Maroun holds a doctorate from the École Pratique de Haute Étude, and he teaches in several Lebanese universities. His research focuses on the history, epigraphy, and cultures of the ancient Near East, particularly the Levant, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Mediterranean world from the late Bronze Age until the advent of Islam. Along with his academic and research activities, Maroun is concerned with the preservation and promotion of Lebanese cultural heritage, as well as his impact on local communities. He's participated in the creation and management of several archaeological and cultural trails. I wish we could hear about all of that today, but instead, you can go ahead and share your screen and we'll enjoy Phoenician women in textual documentation, both epigraphical and literary, with Dr. Maroun Khreich. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Helen. I'm gonna start by sharing my screen. So, good evening or good morning, everyone. Depends on where you are. I'm delighted to be among you, and I hope you're doing good. And that
One
you
moment.
enjoyed
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we don't have your screen shared quite yet. It may not be working. Let's just double check.
I haven't shared my screen. Yes, give me a second, please.
Oh, I apologize. Yeah.
Yes, share.
And once more for presenter mode.
Is it okay?
There may be a delay, but it's not quite in presenter. There it is. Yes, I think there is a delay. Thank you so much. I'm sorry to ask you to begin again.
So today we're going to be discussing Phoenician women and the written documentation, and we're going to discuss the epigraphical and the literary documentation. Allow me first to express my gratitude to the Bade Museum and to Aaron Brody and his team for giving me the opportunity to participate to the lecture on women and gender in the Phoenician homeland and diaspora. When Aaron first asked me to participate to this cycle of conferences, I admit I had a floating moment, like a hesitation moment, especially that I don't have anything, I guess, to add to the debate, especially since women and gender in the Phoenician world have witnessed a rapid growth since 2017, when a workshop entitled Women in Phoenician Society took place at the University of Tübingen. Knowing that before this date, several articles discussing the status and the role of women in Phoenician and Punic societies were published. Here on the screen, you have 12 publications, but this is just a selected bibliography of articles that appeared before 2017. Actually, after 2017, there was a rush in the publication regarding Phoenician women. The present lecture is not an analysis of the role and status of women in the Phoenician society or in the Phoenician world, but rather it's a sort of reflective approach, and I'm going to explain it in a bit why it's a reflective approach to the subject. When first I discussed the topic of Phoenician women in textual documentation in 2017 in the fourth forum of the International Association for the Safeguard of Tyre, I made huge analytical mistakes since I approached the topic from a feminist centrist perspective, and recently, when I was preparing my speech for this conference, I was shocked by how biased I was. Oh man, just look at the title here. It speaks for itself. So I'll try to do my best not to be or to be less biased than I was before. Huh? So my paper or this talk is divided into 3 main parts. Will I evoke rapidly in the first one a couple of ideas regarding the archaeological data or Phoenician and Punic women from an archaeological perspective. Then I will deal with the epigraphical material, followed by the literary text, and with a general conclusion regarding the whole aspect. Allow me first to highlight a few remarks on the approach I use. First of all, it was imperative for me not to fall into the trap and treat the subject, Phoenician women, from a feminist centrist perspective. I already did it once. I'm not going to repeat it again. That's to say, not to overestimate the role of women and grant them rights and roles that are fictitious for their time. But also, at the same time, it was equally important not to approach the subject from an androcentric point of view and thus underestimate the role of women in society. It's true that women did not have the same rights as men in ancient times and perhaps also today. But this does not imply that their role in the society or in the functioning of society was or is less important than the men's. Women are a central and primordial component in the mechanism and functioning of any society. Their role is neither secondary nor complementary. This has been said. I will move to another point. The evocation of women in the written documentation, whether epigraphical and or literacy one, are not homogeneous. Some women are more visible than others, and among the visible women, some are known by their names and or genealogy. So we have visible and anonymous, but we have also visible and known. In fact, women living in urban centers are much more exposed to the written documentation than those living in rural areas. Moreover, women from the upper classes of the society are more visible than those from the lower classes of the society. In opposition, those of the lower classes of the society are much more perceptible in the archaeological documentation. The same scenario goes or also valid for men. A final point to emphasize is the inconsistency of data between the Eastern Mediterranean and the Western Mediterranean, as well as between the Phoenician world and the Punic world. Data from the Punic world is by far better represented than that of the Phoenician world. In fact, drawing conclusions about women based on data spanning over 1 millennia and covering the entire Mediterranean world with its diverse cultures and interconnections is not desirable. Does the status of women in the 8th century Phoenicia resemble that of Punic women on the eve of the fall of Carthage? Can we evaluate the role and status of women in Phoenician and or in Punic society without taking into consideration the evolution of traditions, habits that occurred following their exchange and interconnectivity with various Mediterranean cultures? Well, theoretically, the answer should be no, even a big no, no? But however, in the current state of the documentation, this is all what we can do, with some exceptions, as we're going to see. Before addressing the written documentation, let's see what archaeology tells us about Phoenician women. The earliest studies on women in the Phoenician and Punic world were structured around activities considered as feminine, such as food preparation, ritual, and or funerary practices. Following this perspective, women, the household, the hearth, were considered marginal actors in the construction and development of Phoenician societies and the Phoenician expansion in the Mediterranean. In fact, considering the house as women's kingdom suggests an androcentric approach. If stated today, it poses a lot of problems and gives the impression that the role of women is marginal. The same sentence make women an invisible and confined beings. However, and this is very important, however, approaching this statement from a perspective based on gender studies, that situation is completely different. Archaeological data in the Western Mediterranean have demonstrated that production and caregiving were found in the same place, the hearth, the home. If we take artisanal production, for example, we find that it was carried out with the daily activities next to domestic spaces or within the domestic space. Therefore, there is an intrinsic link between the artisanal production and the domestic activity, which means that part of the artisanal production is domestic production. As demonstrated by Anna Delgado, the concept applied here is the chaîne opératoire or operational chain, which takes into consideration or into account all the stages and tasks of the production process. Accordingly, the role of women, but also children and other components of the society, is neither marginal nor secondary. There is something other than specialist workers. For the Phoenician and Punic communities, the centrality of the house was essential for economic, social, and also biological development. The hearth was a vital space where the activities carried out by all its members were coordinated to meet the productive and reproductive needs beneficial to the home and by extension to that of the whole community. When speaking about the centrality of the home, I'm going to state Anna Delgado, not word by word. I paraphrased a bit what she said and put it in this text. The reference is beneath the text. So, home in urban or provincial centers becomes the key space in the daily life of the community. Regardless of their gender, members of these communities made the home the center of practices related to reproduction, collective care, ritual experience, economical activity, and the establishment of networks and social relationships. Also, the construction of political power. And the last one is interesting, the idea of political. Therefore, tasks undertaken within the household are essential for understanding the development of economic, social, and political system, as well as the birth of economic networks or political powers. And therefore, the centrality of the home in the functioning of society makes women a key element in this mechanism. I'm insisting on the archaeology in order to convince it at first myself, and maybe you, in the centrality of the presence of women in society. Another point, archaeological data in the Phoenician world have revealed that the role of women was not limited to artisanal production. At home, the religious and the non-religious were part of the same course of action. Women played an important role in the development of religiosity and domestic ritual by performing and managing different daily and periodic ritual actions, celebrations related to their private lives, their own production, and the survival of the household in the biological sense and in the social sense of the term. Now, I'm going to state Ida Oggiano. I have translated what she said from Italian to English, and I hope that what I translated is correct. I guess Ida should be with us right now. So excuse me if I have something wrong. So the house is also, I'm stating Ida, huh? The house is also the place where the memory of the family's past was preserved and honored by the performance of rituals. Ritual activities accompanied women's life from birth to death. Women are defined as mothers, guardians, and nurturers. Women were the guardians of daily and personal objects, of family memory, and the memory of things. An important role in this regard was played by older women who constituted the link between generations. We have an example about this in the epigraphical documentation. And she concludes, Ida concludes, women can be attributed a role of primary importance in the construction of the cultural identity of a group. One last point regarding archaeology. So DNA tests or studies of individuals found in Phoenician tombs in the Western Mediterranean have demonstrated the presence of women from early phases of the expansion. Thus, the Phoenician expansion in the Mediterranean can no longer be seen as a male affair. Women actively participated in it. They worked in the field of artisanal production as well as in the religious and cultic field. Ultimately, Phoenician and Punic women played a key role in the formation of social, economic, and cultural cohesion in these commercial diaspora communities. Why have I introduced some archaeological input to my talk? Well, I try to draw some parallels between the archaeological and the epigraphical evidences. The main idea was to highlight the centrality of the house and the role of women to draw limits that I shouldn't cross. Now, a couple of remarks on the epigraphical data before I start dealing with it. Some of you may be familiar with it, some others no. That's why I need to draw some remarks. Before addressing the subject of written documentation, I would like to highlight a couple of points. First, epigraphical data gives an idea of a moment, a place, a specific subject. We can't extend it over millennia or centuries or regions and so on. Two, they evoke a minority, which through this evocation become visible. However, the majority of the population is invisible and anonymous. Three, epigraphical documents made by the Phoenicians express a Phoenician point of view. As for the classical documentation made by non-Phoenician, mainly adversaries of the Phoenicians or rivals of the Phoenicians, their writing express their point of view, how they perceive the Phoenicians, as well as the image they wanted to convey of the Phoenicians. Now, let's begin with the epigraphical documentation, which expresses the Phoenician perspective. This documentation is really poor and very limited, quantitatively and qualitatively. It's to be divided into two parts. The royal inscriptions, we have two, and the non-royal inscriptions, we have, I guess, citing 6 or 7. I would like to mention that in the present lecture, I'm evoking inscriptions from mainly Lebanon and Cyprus, since Carthaginian women, mainly Carthaginian women, were discussed in 2 articles, actually 3 articles, but one is actually an updated version of the other one by Ahmed Ferjawi, Les femmes à Carthage à travers les documents épigraphiques, 1999, and the other one by Maria Giulia Amadasi Guzzo, Dedicatory Inscriptions by Women at Carthage, appeared in 2019. It's an updated version of an article that Maria Giulia did in 1988 and was called Dédicace de femmes à Carthage. So maybe 20, 30 years later, right? Let's start with our first inscription. So the first inscription is that of Bat Nu'am. So Bat Nu'am is the classical way of pronouncing it or reading it, but we suspect that it should be read as Biti Na'im. So bit, not bat, and Na'im. This inscription nowadays in the National Museum of Beirut. It holds the number BNM 2087. You can find it in the basement, which shows the evolution of funerary practice in Lebanon from prehistory up to the medieval period. This inscription, or this sarcophagus, was found in 1929 during the excavation of Maurice Dunant in Jbel, in Byblos. It dates to the 4th century, and it's up to date, the only inscription, the only royal inscription made for or by a queen. We have other royal inscriptions, but this is the only one of a queen. Okay, this inscription states that Bat Nu'am is the mother of King Osbaal, king of Byblos, who is in the same time Osbaal. He's not just the king of Byblos. He is the son of Faltibal, the priest of Baal. Right? Pardon. So, we can assume that Bat Nu'am is the wife of Faltibal. Okay? As you can guess, she is from the upper classes of the society. Mother of the king, right? And she was a well-known person in her time. So let's go into details. Bat Nu'am, first of all, and this is super important, is not a queen. She is the mother of the king. And this is a big difference. Okay? In the same time, she is introduced, or she's not introduced as wife of, but we can, by analyzing the phrase, she is the mother of King Osbaal, who is the son of Faltibal. Therefore, she is the wife of Faltibal, right? So, Bat Nu'am is not a queen, she is the mother of the king. According to this phraseology, Bat Nu'am was an invisible person, but she became visible and known once she is identified as mother of the king. The evocation of the father is complementary, at least for her. For the son, it was imperative, but for her, it's complementary, right? Moreover, she, or those who wrote the text that we find here, or actually here, because what's always interesting when you speak about those funerary inscriptions, who wrote the text? The one who died before he's dead, like, you know, or it was her son, or like his family, or I don't know, a sort of bureau. We really don't know. So those who wrote the text didn't try to tell another story. They didn't say the queen. They didn't claim her as the queen. She said mother of the king, right? But the text specified that she is buried in a royal manner, right? I lay here in a garment and a headpiece on me and a gold muzzle on my mouth. What's interesting is the first part, what follows, like royalties who are before me or who preceded me. So she's not a queen, but buried like royalties. Another important aspect is how she was buried, how she is depicted as buried. Like in a garment, clothes, dress if you want, and the headpiece. Okay, we have nothing like this in the other royal funerary inscriptions, whether Ahiram, Ishmonazor, or Tamnid. So I suspect that this phraseology, the use of the dress and headpiece, express the feminine side of the person, Bat Nu'am. The idea of having a gold muzzle or a muzzle on the mouth is something that we know and we find in the Phoenician funerary practice, or even the Punic one. It's actually to avoid the spirits from entering and leaving the dead body, right? So to get back to the idea of Bat Nu'am isn't a queen, but she is buried in a royalty manner, or like royalties before her, but the idea of expressing the garment and the headpiece is, at least for me, what expresses her femininity. Let's move to another document. The second inscription is that of Ishmunazor, king of the Sidonians. And Malik Sidonian for me is king of the Sidonians. It can be king of Poseidon. I already expressed it. So this object is today in the Louvre Museum. It holds the number AO4806. It was found in 1855 in Sidon and dates to the end of the 6th century. This inscription is in 22 line. And it's up to date, the longest Phoenician inscription found in the Phoenician motherland. It's a funerary inscription of a Sidonian king named Ishmunazor. The text of the inscription is divided into two parts. In the first part, the text tells the story of the deceased king. He was born to a widow and he died at the age of 14. The first part of the text, it shows a warning in which the king forbids anyone to alter his place of rest under penalty of suffering various misfortunes and being annihilated by the gods. In the second part, and this is what interests us, the text mentions Munazor's lineage and his activities. So lineage, where is it? And I, Ishmunazor, king of the Sidonians, son of King Tabnit, king of the Sidonian, grandson of King Ishmunazor, king of the Sidonians, and my mother, Astarte, priestess of Astarte, our lady, the queen, daughter of the king Ishmunazor, king of the Sidonians. So now we know who he is, right? Let's see what. Okay. So we have his lineage, but also what you have in red is actually his activities during his lifetime, such as the construction of temples, the installation of the gods or the enthronement of the gods, the enlargement of the territory. Those are imperative requirements of Near Eastern kings. We have it in Phoenicia, we have it in Mesopotamia, we have it all over the ancient Near East, right? The text of Ishmunazor refers to his action as being carried out jointly with his mother. So we have built, we have placed, we have built, we have built, we have placed. So we have always we. Okay? Moreover, the Lord of Kings gave us. So he's always speaking in the dual, if you want. The only time he's not speaking in dual is actually when he's evoking this idea, in return for deeds I accomplished. And according to Françoise Briquel-Chatonnet in the Baal Hors Série 18, Françoise had an excellent idea by supposing that in return for deeds I accomplished should be a sort of warlike activity. Okay? So as you can guess, women, or at least royal women, if they had the opportunity, they could participate to anything in the political life, but one exception, war. Okay? On the basis of the physiology of the text, I'll let you imagine the role played by Astarte, by the mother of Ishmunazor, from the death of Tabnit until the death of Ishmunazor. This text or this inscription offers us a unique case of a Phoenician queen of a priestly background who gained power and who exercised it. Then they insist on the fact that she exercised power. Her son died at the age of 14. Her son was born to a widowed queen, if you want. It's possible, at least for me, I can compare the activity and the role of Astarte to other women figures or queen of the ancient Near East, such as Hatshepsut, Nefertiti, Tozer from the Egyptian side, or if you want, Akhatmilku in the Ugaritic side, or Samuramate or Zakuto in the Assyrian side, or any or other queens or mother queens in the Hittite world or in the ancient Near East. The phraseology of the text makes me suppose also that she had an opinion regarding the content of the text of Ishmunazor. Or maybe we can assume that she wrote it as well as the one of Tabnit. I would like also to point out that the father of Ishmunazor, Tabnit, and his mother, Ashtar, like their father, were the three priests of Ashtar, while their son Ishmunazor and his cousin later on, Bod Ashtar, are not priests of Astarte. So this double background, being a priest of Astarte and in the same time king or queen, allowed Ashtar to play a major role in the history of Sidon, at least for 14, 15 years. Those two royal texts express the situation of Phoenician royal women, the centrality of the house by the evocation of lineage, and the role played by women in religious and political affairs. Let's move to non-royal inscriptions. I'll start with what we call it the Urbox, the so-called Urbox inscription, which date to the 7th century, hold the number KAA 29, nowadays in the British Museum, is one of the oldest attestation to date of an object made by a Phoenician woman. The inscription states that Amat Baal, daughter of Fatas, who is the servant of someone that the name is lost, offered a box as a gift to Astarte. We can't overanalyze this text actually. The woman is identified here by her patronym. She is the daughter of someone, but also by her function as servant of a lord. The text evokes the role of women in religious or ritual activity. She's offering for the gods, right? A sort of ritual, not really religious, but it's more a ritual aspect. Another inscription. Sorry, I'm not having the photos because the photos of those inscriptions were really bad or are really bad. So we have two inscriptions from al-Amid. Those are epitaphs or funerary stelae. In the first text, the woman is identified by her patronym. She is the daughter of someone. In the second one, she is the lady, Liamon, is identified but by her through her matrimonial. She is the wife of someone. Okay? In several funerary inscriptions from Cyprus, also, the wife, the mother, or the daughter of the dedicator are mentioned, often with their ancestors and their functions. This is not a funerary one. This is a commemorative object or inscription. So the inscription that we have right now, second, KI 40, the one I'm showing you. Beti Shilam makes a dedication of a statue to Rashaf Mikal, a Greek deity, for her grandchildren on behalf of their father. In this case, it's not the father who makes the dedication for unknown reason, it's the grandmother. Note that the grandmother cites her father and the grandfather, as well as the ancestors of her grandchildren over 3 generations. This is a well-established family, certainly from the upper class. The importance of this inscription, it actually demonstrates not just the involvement of women in ritual and religious activities of the family, but their role as guardians of the memory, as described previously by Ida Ojian. Another inscription. Yeah. Voilà. The inscription KI 34 from Kityon, a certain Arish makes a dedication to his father and his mother by citing 5 paternal ancestors and their functions, commercial agents, right? And 3 maternal ancestors with their functions, chief inspectors of water source. In a note made in 2017, Françoise Briquel-Chatonnet, Robert Holy, and Jimmy Dakash assumed that the mother of the dedicator is the sister of Milkiyaton, who usurped the power in Kitu. As in the previous inscriptions, the lineage mentioned in this dedication evokes upper class families. Here, we have the evocation of the mother, who is the daughter of someone. This is a classical evocation of women in the Phoenician inscriptions. The inscription of Adhad, the one I'm showing you right now, specified that she is the daughter of a judge. She also cites the name of her husband and the lineage up to his grandfather. As in al-Amid inscription, the woman is linked here to her husband, and also this dedication evokes upper class families, right? When you have 2-3 generations, those are upper classes. One last example is the following one. The funerary inscription made by Abdusir during his lifetime for himself and for his wife. The woman is referred here as wife of and daughter of, as we have seen in the previous inscription, but also as in al-Amid. Those examples I showed you fits exactly what have been said on Carthaginian women, Ferjawi and also Amadarsi Gudsu's article. The al-Amid inscriptions mentioned women with Egyptian theophoric names, while their father or husband have purely Phoenician name. This is intriguing, but we have other examples in al-Amid for even maids having Egyptian-based names, right? The three Cypriot inscriptions, the first three Cypriot inscriptions evoke women from the upper class, long lineage. Women are always described as daughter of, wife of. This is almost imperative. No reference to any function or title held by women in non-royal inscriptions, at least those I showed you. We have other examples in Carthage. One last remark. In the state of the documentation, we don't know whether women worked as scribes, but at least we can assume that women could command written text and probably write texts. And here I will cite Brigitte Lyon and Cécile Michel. For them, what they have said is regarding actually mainly what they knew or know about Mesopotamia. So women may have had real access to written culture in condition identical to those of men. So social position belonging to the court, temples, the world of merchants seems more relevant than a gender distinction. In their written relationships, women would therefore be men like others. The main difference is quantitative. Women are proportionally much less likely than men to have used the written word. And I guess we have the same thing in the Phoenician. Let's move now to the literary documentation. I guess if you look at the photo, you will immediately know what I'm going to talk about right now. So regarding the literary documentation, it's composed of two sources: the classical documentation, Greco-Roman on one side, and the biblical data from the other side. This documentation was written, as I said, by opponents of the Phoenicians. It never serves to paint a real or objective picture, but it expresses the writer's point of view. It's a biased image that pleases the reader, to which they wrote actually, and serves to convey a specific ideology and or propaganda. In this part, I will focus on the way in which the authors of these stories describe the Phoenician woman. The first text is the legend of Elisa, or Dido if you want, founder of Carthage. The story is one of the foundation myth that is the most reproduced by Greek and Roman authors. We find it in Menander of Ephesus, and it was reproduced by several late authors such as Josephus, Timaeus, Polybius, Justin, Virgil, and so on, so on, so on. Married to her uncle Akerbas, priest of Melkart. Elissa is the sister of Pygmalion. Both are the children of the king of Tyre. Well, for me, they are Sidonians, but this is another story for another time. With the death of their father, Pygmalion rose to power, kills his uncle, the husband of Elissa, in order to seize his wealth, which pushes Elissa to flee Tyre, taking with her her fortune and the sacred objects of Melkart. She takes the sea, stops in Cyprus before heading west. Once arriving on the African coasts, she tricks the Numidian king by making wires from the cow skin, allowing her to seize a fairly large territory where she settles with her companions. After founding a city called Qartihadashti, or the new city, Carthage. Wanting to preserve the memory of her late husband, she refuses to marry Yarbas, the Numidian king, and commits suicide at the stake. Did you know that this is the only founding myth attributed to a woman? But have we wondered why? Well, from a side, it's very nice and pleasant to assume that this myth demonstrates the character and ability of the Phoenician woman, her pride, resilience, and even her sense of exploration and challenge. Yeah, it's very nice. We can assume. This is what I assumed in 2017, huh? But that's not the case. Sadly, that's not the case. This etiologic myth, or foundation myth, if you want, is the Greek version, and it's unique in antiquity. We have allusions to other myths regarding the foundation of Carthage. But this is the Greek version that we have, right? This is a rather singular founding myth, as it presents the foundation of Carthage as purely a feminine enterprise. Phoenician men are excluded from the story. They are too bad beside the priests, right? Carthage is the only city in antiquity that was founded by a woman. It's neither a god nor a hero, but a Phoenician princess on the run who manages to found a city by treachery. Like, this is so typical Phoenician. By depicting the foundation of Carthage this way, Greeks and later on Romans intended the humiliation of Phoenician men. This is the apex of depreciation. It's an insult for Phoenician men, especially in the context of the Phoenician expansion in the Mediterranean and the role played by Carthage between the 5th and the 3rd century. This myth and its variations, precisely the Roman version, that of Virgil, which is very dark. When Agnès leaves Carthage, Dido, the other name of Elissa, unable to bear this abandonment, kills herself with the sword that Agnès had left her. What? Okay, this myth was not made to praise Phoenician women. It cannot be used as a reference for the ability, intelligence, entrepreneurship, and audacity of Phoenician women, huh? It's a propaganda tool to downgrade Phoenicians in general, specifically Phoenician men. We can take this story as a proof of the status of Phoenician women. When in 2017, I praised the courage, intelligence, and entrepreneurship of the Phoenician princes, more than 2,000 years later, I fell into the trap of Greek propaganda against the Phoenicians. And believe me, I will never, ever do it again. The second story is that of, you can guess who she is, Europa, daughter of Agenor, king of Tyre, according to the classical historiography, but not according to the Phoenician tradition. We're going to see why. Zeus saw her and transformed himself into a white bull. No, but can you imagine the amount of fertility and testosterone in this image? White bull. Wow. So he transformed himself into a white bull to get closer to her. Attracted by this white bull, the princess sat on his back, and Zeus flew to the shores to the west, if you want. He brought her to the island of Crete, where they united, they mated, right? the story does not end here. And now music in the background. Europe was given later on by Zeus as a wife to the king of Crete. Europe disappeared. Her father sent his 3 children and the mother to search for her. Among his children, we have Cadmus, the one who transmitted the alphabet to the Greeks. This is a very complex legend, extremely complex. This legend is often analyzed as reflecting the looting and kidnapping made the Greeks practiced on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean. We have proof from the 8th century and onward. We have it in the Assyrian document, but also we have it in Homer, right? Europa is not more than a valuable, cannot be described more than a valuable commodity, stolen from the adversaries of the Greeks, the Phoenicians, consumed and offered as a gift to the king of Crete. It's true that some suppose that Europa here gave her name to a continent, but this is a Greek legend that figurated Greek ideas. I'm not going to get into this type of details. I'm going to go to discuss something else. As I said at the beginning, this is a very complex myth. There is a big debate over the origin of this myth. Some scholars suppose that this myth is actually a Greek myth and identify Europe with the great Aegean goddess, the deified earth, mother of all beings, who from the earliest antiquity is represented accompanied by a bull, her attribute. While other scholars consider the myth as Phoenician. Europa on the bull represents the departure of the goddess of the night, a variant of Astarte, toward the setting sun. What's interesting about this myth that I really don't know what to do with it. I really don't know how to analyze, because we need to answer a lot of the questions, such as, is it a Greek myth or a Phoenician one? Why did the Phoenician adopt a Greek myth if this is a Greek myth? So we know that the double myth of Europa and Cadmus is the only so-called Greek myth that was adopted by the Phoenician during the Hellenistic and Roman period. So I consider this myth as the Greek for the moment. I'm considering this myth as a Greek. Therefore, I wonder why would the Phoenician of the Hellenistic and Roman period would actually adopt a Greek myth? Why did Sidon mint coins with the legend of Europe for 4 centuries, while in the classical documentation, Europa is the daughter of Agenor, king of Tyre? In the same time, Tyre and Sidon minted coins with the legend of Cadmus. Why Europe's parents have Greek names? So there is a lot of questions before, analyzing the image of Europe in this myth. Moving to another topic. This is my favorite personal character. So in Homer's Odyssey, book 15, the passage 425, the author, or Homer, introduces a Sidonian woman as following. There was a Phoenician woman at my father's house. The one is speaking here is Eumaeus, the swineherd of Laertes, the king of Ithaca, Odysseus' father. So Eumaeus speaking, was a Phoenician woman at my father's house, beautiful, tall, expert in fine works. A Phoenician sailor asked her who she was, where she came from. She answers, exceptional answer. I pride myself on being born in Sidon, rich in bronze. I am the daughter of Aribas of immense wealth. Taphian pirates seized me, and as I was coming from the field, brought me here and sold me to this house. And the man Ctesius, the father of paid very good money for paid for me a goodly price. Well, the Sidonian woman is the daughter of a rich Sidonian merchant. She was kidnapped, like Europa, from her homeland, by Taphians, a sort of Greeks or Ionians, right? she was sold to a Greek king, where she became a slave. Our friend, the Sidonian lady, is an interesting character. She who was stolen from her homeland, in retaliation, she kidnaps Emmaus, the young son of King Theseus, to whom she was sold, and fled aboard a Phoenician ship, or a ship of Phoenician merchants, who came to trade in the kingdom of Theseus. After a week of navigation, once she kidnapped the kid, with her Phoenician co-citizens, the goddess Artemis struck her and killed her. Immediately, his body was thrown to seals and to fish. The Sidonian women is described here as being beautiful, skillful, rich, and proud of her origins. Those are the attributes of Phoenician women in the Greek mind. Not necessarily men, because men are described as renowned sailors, but rapacious and dishonest people. Our friend is, in the same time, as we can guess from the text, she's cunning and she hates the Greeks. The kidnap of the child of Emmaus reflects her hate toward the Greeks. But as you can guess, the Greek gods punished her. For the Greeks and for the Greek gods, it's a pride to steal from the others, the barbarian. But once someone steals from the Greeks, he's punished by death by the Greek gods. Europa and the Sidonian of Homer were both kidnapped by Greeks and both described as from the upper classes, rich, beautiful. The Sidonian of Homer has a plus. She is proud of her origin. This allows us to assume the attributes of Phoenician women in the classical documentation. Elisa have the same attributes. But Europa and the Sidonian of Homer were treated as commodities. This is how the Greeks perceived Phoenician women. One last example. No, not last. Still have to. The description of the destruction of Carthage in 146 is a perfect example of the image the Roman conveyed of Punics. When Scipio Aemilianus besieged Carthage, Hasdrubal, the general in charge of the defense of the city, some wanted to make him a Barcid, but he's not. So this Hasdrubal is described as a courageous and loyal man. So according to the Roman tradition, he deserts the Punic ranks and surrenders to Scipio. Seeing her husband at the feet of Scipio, his wife invoked the gods and threw herself with her two children into fire. Another interesting story. It does not describe the courage and pride of Hasdrubal's wife, but the cowardice of her husband. This opposition is well designed by Polybius, the one who wrote the text, and it ideally serves Roman propaganda. The fact of appreciating the bravery of the woman implies or serves to undermine her man even today. This is a very good example of sustainable propaganda, since every time we appreciate the decision of Hasdrubal's wife, we fell into the Roman trap of depreciation of Punic man even more than 2,000 years later. This is the last example. So before I move to the biblical documents, I would like to evoke rapidly Sophon Baal, known as Sophon Sibylle or Sophonibe in the Roman documentation. This Punic woman from an aristocratic family is described as smart, well-educated, very patriotic, and able to make everybody subservient to her wishes. After being promised to Massinissa in a diplomatic arranged marriage, a Libyan if you want, she married Syphax for the same reason. And when Syphax was defeated by Massinissa and the Romans, Syphax accused her for being the reason he betrayed Massinissa and the Romans. So androcentric for the moment. Massinissa married her on the battlefield, and upon her request, Massinissa granted her the right to die like a Carthaginian queen by suicide instead of being delivered to the Romans. So Von Baal is a historic character. Well, this is what scholars agree on. She is described as either Phoenician and Punic woman in the classical documentation. Cunning, as usual, beautiful, rich, pride, and from the upper classes of the society, like Elisa, but also like the wife of Hasdrubal. She commits suicide, avoiding the dishonor of the enemy, which is not the case of Phoenician and Punic men, right? Our final example. This time, we're going to be discussing the Bible. The Bible has preserved the testimony of a Phoenician queen in the person of Jezebel, daughter of Itobal, king of the Sidonians. She married Ahab, king of Israel. The Phoenician queen is one of the key characters in the history of the kingdom of Samaria, or the kingdom of Israel. Historiographical tradition, the analysis, depicts her as the reflection of Sidonian influence over the kingdom of Israel, or Samaria. She introduced the worship of Baal and Astarte into the northern kingdom. On the death of her husband, Ahab, she continued to reign with her two sons, Okozias and then Yoram. Both were killed by Yehu at the instigation of the prophet Elisha. Jezebel had a long reign since she reigned with her husband and with her two sons. This suggests that she has a growing influence. She did not simply introduce her deities, Baal and Astarte, into her adopted country, but she also challenged the religious caste and the word of Yahweh. Considered by the Bible as the most impious character in the history of Israel, she turns her husband away from the national cult, the cult of Yahweh, and pushes him to tyranny and persecutes the worshipper of the national cult. Among them, we have the prophet Eliah and Elisha. Her legacy continued after her death with her daughter Atalia, who introduced the cult of Baal into the kingdom of Judah. This is how bad Jezebel is in the Bible. As in the classical documentation, the Bible evokes Phoenician princess or queen, never ordinary women. But in contrast, it describes her as in a very negative way. Well, the Greeks and the Romans try to depict some beautiful girl of Phoenician and Punic women. In the Bible, everything is negative. So this is the so-called seal of Jezebel. And let's move to our conclusions. From what I just discussed, we can notice that Phoenician inscriptions exhibit women from the upper sphere of the society, making them visible and known. We have their names, information about them, such as genealogy, role, accomplishments, and so on. The royal inscriptions evoke lucky women like Bat Nu'am, or exceptional women like Ashtar, who certainly played a significant role in the history of the kingdom of Sidon. Non-royal inscriptions evoke women from the upper echelon of society. Their evocation demonstrates the social situation as well as the place they occupied in society. Women are often identified as daughter of or wife of, sometimes, as in the case of Bat Nu'am, mother of. In some cases, their genealogy is detailed, especially if they were aristocrats or if they held high ranks, high religious offices, if you want. This is a case that we can see in the Tophet of Carthage, right? Inscriptions with name of women without any ancestry or official titles lead us to believe that these women could have been from the middle class, according to our modern terminology. Classical data introduces queen or princesses, as well as women from the upper classes. They never evoke ordinary women. Moreover, the depiction of women in this document is made in order to depreciate and insult Phoenician men. Elisa, the Sidonian of Homer, Sophone, Baal are described following a Greek or Roman stereotype of Phoenician women: rich, beautiful, cunning, and proud. Europa and the Sidonian are also described as valuable commodities for the Greeks. These descriptions demonstrate the image according to which Greeks and Romans perceive Phoenician women. Arriving to Jezebel, by depicting Jezebel, the daughter of the king of the Sidonian, as wife of Ahab, king of Samaria, the Hebrew Bible ascended the kingdom of Samaria over the kingdom of the Sidonians. No? The Bible emphasizes the impact of the Phoenician queen, who plays a leading role in the history of the kingdom of Samaria, but she is depicted as the source of evil. She represents everything Yahweh prohibited. These stories were written from an androcentric perspective, but by adversaries of the Phoenicians, and as a result, their use as source of information about the role and status of Phoenician women and Phoenician and Punic women would be, in my opinion, very problematic. My commandment is the following: thou shalt not use classical sources for the study of women in Phoenician world and the Phoenician world. Ultimately, the Phoenician women was an essential component in Phoenician society. Her involvement and dedication to her house, to her community, and to her beliefs were the key element in the construction of Phoenician culture and its propagation throughout the Mediterranean. I will conclude with a long quote of Stephanie Lynn Boudin in Sex and Gender and Sex. What's in bold is just, I paraphrased those couple of words. Stephanie Lynn says, we cannot impose contemporary ideas about gender and sex onto antiquity. We cannot force elders to manifest the gender identities and dynamics that we then want to recreate for ourselves. We make casual references to specific topics to support our own idealized versions without really considering either the science or the subjectivities involved. The purpose of theory is to force us out of comfortable modes of thinking, of believing that how we see the world is how everyone experiences. Theory makes us question, confront, and reconsider our perception of truth and reality, telling us not to believe everything we think. This is good, but when it turns on itself, when it causes us to force others into our current modes of thinking or wishing, then it's time to stop and reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. I really appreciate it. I want to just start by saying thank you for openly sharing your shame. A lot of us have this shame of how we used to write about Phoenician women, that we never took a class on gender in our graduate programs, and we reproduce some of these essentializing ideas without thinking, and now we can do better. So I really appreciate how honestly you talked about your growth as a scholar on this topic, and you've done some really great work towards dismantling the stereotype of the male capitalist seafaring Phoenician as the sort of primary agent in the evolution of Phoenician and Punic culture. So thank you for that. I want to invite our YouTube audience who might be watching live. If you type a question into the chat there, that will get redirected to me so I can read it to our speaker if you'd like to contribute that way. But we already have a behind the scenes list of questions that has been accumulating. So I hope you don't mind if I jump right in here for a few questions. First, when talking about your approach, I really liked this language of becoming visible. You become visible in the epigraphic record if you are of a certain status or you have a relative status to somebody else. I wanted to know more about how the genealogy that we get in some of these epigraphic inscriptions, how you think that's working. I know at Carthage, we have maybe a couple examples of a woman whose genealogy is given in terms of her mother's name, or at least it's a feminine marked name. But I don't know that we have any of those from the Levantine homeland. Do you know? Is there anyone who
No,
is a
we
woman?
don't have in the
Yeah.
at least for now in the state of the documentation, we don't have any example neither on the eastern coast nor in Cyprus. But yeah, those were discussed by Amadasi Guzzo and Ferjawi, and they consider them as related to the temple, sacred prostitution, and so on. But I haven't digged the subject, so I'm not going to
I understand, yeah.
go much more in depth. But
I
yeah,
know.
this what was supported by Ferjawi and Amadasi Guzzo, and in the state of the documentation, it's so convincing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's difficult for those of us who are sort of moving away from a view of sacred prostitution at all. But then we have to answer the question, what does that mean then, that distinction?
Yeah, I was reading something for Stephanie Limbudin about
Yeah,
the topic,
exactly.
and yeah, I guess she's
No longer.
she dismantled the whole yeah.
Yeah, we'll see.
So it's a big interrogation point.
That's right. Okay, so let's see where to pick. One question. So it sounds like I know what you're going to say to this, but you made this excellent takeaway. Thou shalt not use classical sources to reconstruct the lives of Phoenician women. I agree. Wonderful. What do you think in general? Does the study of goddesses in general also really make it difficult to use any of that information to reconstruct the lives of women in the ancient world as well? Would you throw out goddesses?
I avoided speaking about deities because this is the idealized image.
Yeah.
So is it true? I'm not so sure. I am the last thing I read, I guess, is Paulo Xella, and you know, I had my reason. It's not. It's just actually. Can we consider deities as an expression of women, of this? I'm not so sure. It's so beautiful to be true.
Yeah, exactly.
At least for me. That's why I avoided introducing deities in my talk.
Well, one of the things I was thinking of as you went through these great legends, legendary women, the founding stories, is that, not only are they sort of orientalizing as you said, feminizing Carthage, sort of marginalizing the founding figures, but I wonder also if some of this is related to Astarte or Tanit being prominent in their pantheons, right? You have a goddess at the head of your pantheon. It's another element of feminization to play on in some of these Greek and Roman stories. Do you think there's anything to that, or is that coincidental?
Very good. I haven't actually had this reflection. I would think
I don't know either. It's
I
speculation.
To be honest, I have no answer. But this is we know that when speaking about Phoenician pantheon, we know that we have 2-3 deities, like feminine deities. We don't have 20 or 30 or 40 like in the Greek or in the Roman world, or even in Mesopotamia or Egypt. We have 2-3, right? But I haven't thought of it like this. This is a good reflection. I may think of it, but I insist on the fact that it's not hazardous that the Greeks and then Roman, but also the Hebrew did the same. We don't find it in the Mesopotamian and the Egyptian documentation, but we find it in the Greek. Those are real adversaries. The Egyptians dominated the Phoenicians. Yeah. They didn't give any interest for what the Phoenician think, or even the Mesopotamian. But Hebrew, Greeks, and Roman were adversaries of the Phoenician and or the Punic. Therefore, they needed, in my opinion, to vehiculate such ideas.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I agree. So maybe just a few more clarifying points on some of these specific examples. One is in the case of the CIS 146, the Abdusir funerary stele, KB 1031. This one is so interesting because, it's a funerary stele. We would imagine one burial, and yet he devotes the stele to not just himself, but his wife.
So
If
we're
you,
talking about CIS 46?
yes, 46. Did I
Okay.
get it right? Abdusir
Yes, yes,
funerary stele. Yes.
yes, yes, yes.
I know we don't have anything more than the stele, but would you guess this is a double burial, that the wife and husband were buried together? Or do you think the stele commemorated a wife who died before or a wife who was still living? Do you have any idea? What would you guess?
Um, Good question.
I'm sorry to ask. We
We
don't know.
haven't
We
found
don't
an
know.
overlapping,
Yeah, yeah.
at least in the state of documentation, we haven't found
Exactly.
a double deck funerary tomb for man and
Mm,
women. So I don't know, but it could be interesting. Like, yes, it might reflect this, but was it the case?
yeah, no
Maybe we
idea.
need to ask those who digged in Cyprus and or uh,
Right.
in Sur, maybe Paco or
Mm,
in Spain. But for the moment, no, I don't think we have we have we have something inside. I'm not allowed to speak about this,
I
where we
understand.
have a family in a pit for like
Mm,
a century,
yeah.
but
And I
it's
think
not published. So I can't elaborate more on
I
this.
understand. No, completely. I think at Khalde as well, Roger Saida thought that two burials, which were sort of spooning, like one and
True,
then the
true.
other,
Yeah,
that they
yeah.
might have been buried at the same time, but there wasn't enough data. He published only the preliminary results. So
The funny thing is that you are an expert in funerary practice and you're asking me the
I'm
questions. So
sorry. I'm sorry.
I can't debate with you.
I don't mean to debate. I just want your perspective because I wonder about these things. Okay, sorry. Hey, next one. Okay. So with Bat Noam,
Yes.
I love your suggestion that this inventory, I have the garment on my body, I have the headpiece on my head, I have this bridle or muzzle on my mouth, that this is actually a marker of the proper feminine way to bury. I think that's a really intriguing suggestion. And the way you translated it in English, I think you said royalties, but am I right that the plural noun is actually feminine? Do we have a feminine plural there? It's in
In Semitic,
construct.
it's feminine, actually.
Yeah. So this is even more supportive of your hypothesis that it's, like the
For me,
royal
it's not
women.
queen. Actually,
Yeah.
even for others in our group of Phoenician, like the Orient Méditerranée, Françoise, Jimmy, Robert Holy, and so on,
Mm,
we don't consider it as queens, but more as
royal women.
royalties. Yeah,
Yeah.
royalties, if you want. Yeah.
Good, good. Yes. And so I'm wondering too, earlier in the series, Becky Martin talked about the anthropoid sarcophagi, and she really sees very little in terms of distinguishing between what do women wear, what do men wear, what do women do their hair like, what do men do their hair like. There's so much overlap. So do you think that this womanly way of burying, or at least inscribing a description of the body as adorned, do you think that's some evidence to disagree with Becky, or do you think there's a change in, the timeline between the anthropoid
I do
sarcophagi?
question, isn't it
Mm.
a Hellenistic mode?
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Did it exist in the 8th century? And I don't know. And
Yeah.
you see what I mean? So again, what I was saying, I was when speak for example, but no, I can't extract this idea of describing the clothes and so on the whole Phoenician word. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Just one case. For this case, this is what I consider. Therefore, also for what Becky said, like, yeah, I can put it in the maybe 4th, 3rd century.
Yeah.
Late 15th, but I don't wanna like stretch it all over the whole millennium and the whole Mediterranean. Does it make sense?
It does. Thank you for the resisting. Yeah. Let's say only about what we can say something
Yeah,
about.
exactly.
Yeah.
I don't want to get stuck in like in
Good.
2017. No.
Good. Okay, so I have a question from YouTube from Rosanna. She says, if I understood you correctly, I think she's referring to your
Yeah.
aside. If I understood you correctly, you hinted that Elisa might be Sidonian in your view,
Yeah.
right? To
Yeah.
me, they're
Yeah.
Sidonian. Could you tell
Yeah.
us more about that? Thank you for the wonderful presentation.
Hi, Rosanna. Well, It's related to how I read the history of Tyre and Sidon in the at least in the 9th, 8th century, where I consider that there is nothing such as the kingdom of Tyre before the end of the 8th century. For me, the kingdom is called Kingdom of the Sidonian,
Yeah.
not even Kingdom of Sidon, it's Kingdom of the Sidonian. And Tyre was part of it. What actually stands more with this is the on the hill of Pisa, it's the temple of Eshmun and not the temple of Melkart. We know nothing about Melkart in Carthage, and this should be problematic for all those speaking about Carthage, in opposition to what we have in Cadix, where we have the temple of Melkart. So I'll go more for Sidon.
Yeah.
For the moment, I'm still with the Sidonian origin, and but again, sous réserve.
Yeah, that's a great example, though, the importation of Eshmun. That's why not?
Yeah. Even if in the classical tradition they say like she took with her the sacred object of Melkart, but by the end of the day, or when the journey ends in Libya, in Africa, in Carthage, we have the temple of Eshmun. We don't have the temple of Melkart.
Yes.
No one spoke about the temple of Melkart in Carthage. Isn't this problematic? For me, it is.
Yep. Yeah, I can see that. Even though we have personal names with Melkart, this is different. Like the evidence of worship is not there. Yeah.
It doesn't mean that when the royal family, the Sidonian royal family lost their territory and moved to Tyre, the whole heritage or legacy of the Sidonian kingdom went to Tyre. This is the Tyre of what's the name of Ezekiel and so on. This is the Tyre that we know in the 7th century and onward, not in the 8th, at least for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Hayrusanna.
Well, we run out of time, so maybe the last question I will direct to you today is this very intriguing point you made with Leon and Michael, I think. Yes.
Yeah.
That upper class women may well have had access to being able to read, but they don't often have access to leaving text behind, that is inscribing or some other evidence. Would you go out on a limb and say,
no, we don't know. We really don't know. But they were involved in, I'm not going to say scribal tradition, but they could read and write at least. Those of the, like, for example, for me, Astarte, in my opinion, she wrote the text. She wrote the text of Ishmunazur. This is for me, I'm scared to say, but it's sort of evidence. It can be someone else who wrote the text. So yes, women from the upper classes had access to this lady in what was the number of the Cypriot one? The baby 82, the one offering instead of the father, you know? She could read and write. This is for me, those are examples of women who could at least commend texts, and they knew what they wanted.
Right.
So yeah, even if they are with Cécile Michel and Brigitte Lyon.
Yeah. So even if they are not themselves carving into stone, they are dictating the inscription they want, and they read it and so on.
Allow me to just pinpoint a point. Commending the text or writing the text doesn't mean doing the lapicide, doesn't mean doing the carving. Those are completely two things. Like, I commended the text, I wrote the text, doesn't mean I'm a stone master to incise it.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, good to have this in our
papyrus. Yes.
Recording. Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Thank you so much for spending so much time on our questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to every single question, but thank you for those who contributed. And it's our real pleasure to have you with us in the series. So I now need to turn this back over to Brooke for a couple more announcements from the Bade Museum. Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right, well, I would like to thank again Dr. Maroun Khreich for his fascinating talk today. Unfortunately, our April lecture featuring Dr. Tatiana Pedrazi has been canceled, so our Women and Gender in the Phoenician Homeland and Diaspora lecture series will conclude in May. Please join us again on May 2nd when Dr. Adriano Orsinger will present Gender and Masks, a look through the Phoenician Punic lens. So we thank everyone for tuning in today, and I hope that